Il podcast dello Strength and Conditioning italiano.
Ciao a tutti ragazzi e benvenuti in questo nuovo episodio di ITASCS podcast. Quest'oggi ho il piacere e l'onore di avere con me Anthony Turner. So first of all, Anthony, may I call you Anthony or do I have that's fine.
So good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here with me. And I really think this podcast could be really helpful for people that are from Italy that are looking for to better understanding what we will talk about in the upcoming future. So first of all, thank you very much. I know you've been really busy, so it's kind of like a great, huge pleasure for me to have you here.
Thank you. No, thanks ever so much for the opportunity. It's always good fun to come on and chat. So thank you, Andrea.
So for just our listeners, if you could give our listeners a little bit of introduction of yourself, both your academic and professional background, and then we'll go through the first true question.
Yeah, well, so I'm a professor in strength and conditioning at Middlesex University, and actually I've been there for maybe 17 years now, unbelievably, which is just crazy. And before that, I was 5 years. I was at a college, which was brilliant because I think that's where you really sort to learn how to teach and understand that process there. And before that, I did my master's in Sheffield, Hallam, in the north of England, and my undergrad in Coventry in the Midlands. But now I'm back home. I live in London, and so I'm very fortunate to have a university right on my doorstep, which is excellent. So I'm super happy for that. And I think over the years I've sort of gone through just about every post you could imagine. Now look after the research, postgraduate research at the university. So yeah, that's it. And what I've always tried to do, actually, and even going way back to when I was studying, is I've always worked in sport as well. I've always coached, and I tried to do that so I'm not overly ironic in what I do. I think it would be, otherwise I could be standing at the front of a class telling people what happens, having never experienced it. I'm like, no, it definitely goes like that, and they're like, no, it doesn't, just because it says it in this textbook. Yeah. When you've got a different group of athletes in front of you, some are good, some aren't good, some want to do it, some don't want to do it, and you haven't got the equipment or the resources, etc. So I've always worked in sport. I actually can't think of a year that I haven't coached in some capacity, been involved in consultancy in some capacity from the beginning. And I think that's been a real valuable part for me, even in my own CPD, because I'm always working with different practitioners and I'm always learning from them, right? They're experts in their field, and I get to go and spend time with them and learn from them as well. And I get to see how to apply in my own practice. And I've worked some really cool places. I worked within GB fencing leading up to the Olympics, which was a fantastic time. I looked after that program. I worked more heavily with the army, which was great, and still do little bits now. And equally, I work at Spurs now in the women's academy, which is fantastic and another great opportunity for me to be applying into practice. I've written lots about GPS and things like that. Yet this my only opportunity to actually use the GPS and get hands on it, and I go, oh, okay, because I might be able to run a good stats with it, right? I might be able to good statistics on it, but I get to see the other side of it now and what it means in the day-to-day running. So that's also very important. So yeah, that's my background. Obviously, I would consider myself an academic and a researcher, but I still coach. And I still like to think some people still would see me in that capacity to some degree, but I would hold my hands up as an academic and researcher at that first and foremost. Yeah.
Awesome. Like it's really great to hear from such a high level profession from you that you want to keep I'll say keep one foot in the
Yeah.
practical side, you know. So yeah, that's really good. Of course, Anthony will say that you have like multiple research that published, and you also have been author of many different books. So it's, as I said before at the beginning, is a great pleasure for me. So I'll go straight to the first question will be in regards of change of direction. So my first question will be if you could give our listeners like kind of like a brief explanation of what actually change of direction means, or what we have to look in the concept of change of direction, and also like why is most of the time is confused with like agility. So determine these two KPI and understanding what's the difference between them, and you know, later we'll talk also to how to assess them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I think I'll start with what I think our role is as practitioners and coaches, and I'll get to there, I promise. But you know, I think all training, everything that we do is a means to an end, right? And that end point, for the most part, is an agile athlete, right? Because that's what they have to do when on the field. So everything I do with them in the gym, or the conditioning work I do with them out in the field, or the technical work, is to make them better on the field. Is to make them a more agile performer on the field. And an agile or agility, or someone that's agile is a fantastic description. And this is why it's the means to the end, because agility is about the capacity to recognize a relevant stimulus and have an appropriate action to go with it, right? And that appropriate action normally is some sort of change in velocity, whether that's a speed up or slow down, and a change in your intended direction as well. And you know, part of that, so you can almost see that there's these two components: is that recognition of the agility, sorry, the stimulus, and the decision as to what to do with that stimulus.
Yep.
Right, and that's really important. And you know, you can see these sort of high level athletes that would see this stimulus, and then they make a decision, but that decision is based on this. They've already taken a snapshot of the entire field. They figured out where someone is relative to the ball. They've seen this play in their head, you know, several times. So they're making these series of different predictions. If I do this, this will happen. If I do this, this will happen. If I do that, and so on. And so this whole perceptual decision-making element that comes with that, you know, and with the recognition of the correct stimulus. And that's a phenomenal athlete. That's at the top, right? When you can do that and you can make these decisions, you can think 1-2 steps ahead. But whatever it is they decide to do, they must act on it. And that's the physical, there's a physical consequence then. And that's where we come in. And that's going to be a change in velocity and a change in direction, most probably. And so there you have the two elements. You've got the decision and perceptual part of it, the response to the stimulus, and then you've got the consequence, the physical action, which is the change of direction bit. And I think that they're, you know, obviously they're fundamental. They're both fundamental parts, and we can absolutely affect both of them. But certainly the decision making, and that is something you develop over time and experience in small-sided games and playing competitions, understanding the technical, the tactical demands, and being put in different decisions. So we'll do that with 1v1s and things like that. And the small-sided games, the coaches, of course, will take care of. But what we can really affect is the change of direction element. So park the stimulus to one side, and the decision making to one side is the bit when they go, right, this is what I'm going to do. And that is going to be an acceleration, a deceleration, a turn in movement, a change in direction. And then, you know, if that's the movement, the rocket fuel for that movement, if you like, is strength, power, and the capacity to continue that across a 90-80 minute match is the conditioning element, right? And so that's very much so what we can affect. I think breaking it down like that helps us understand our role and where we're trying to get to. But again, for me, the training is all a means to an end, and that end point is an agile athlete, and maybe the other layer we'll add to that is someone that can complete those agile movements at high intensity across a prolonged period of time as well.
Awesome. So is it possible to say that like an agile athlete, or we'll say a better agile athlete is the athlete that have capacity to understanding the cognitive loading that he has to be aware of and determine like how fast he can determine the reaction. Of course, underneath it must be like the physical qualities that you just said. So I think that everything comes, is parallel. So you can, better understanding like what the cognitive loading that athlete have to be aware of, and also like the physical part. So assessing the physical part is the job of the S&C coach. So is precisely how you said. So in regards of like the after saying the definition of it, so how can we truly assess change of direction? Besides, there are multiple different tests that are, try to understand like change direction. But what's your go-to test, and why? And how would you implement it in order to have like both a quantitative and a qualitative analysis of movement?
Yeah, nice. And I think, look, no matter what the physical capacity, if there's always lots to choose from, right?
Yeah,
I think our expertise has been not about, it's been more about trying to reduce what we do, right? Because there is that much available, and obviously testing change of direction or agility, or there's loads that we can go with. So I guess I'll start with any test that I do, irrespective of whether it's change of direction or not. I try to remove the sports skill element from it. I want this to be a raw measure of physical capacity, i.e. the thing that affects me and my responsibility within the team. See, otherwise, if there's a skill element to it, to any test, if a test gets better or indeed worse, I can't be certain where that change has occurred. Is this a fault with my program, or indeed a positive in my program, or is it they got more technical, more tactical, they're making better decisions, so on and so forth. And so for that reason, if I'm going to do a measure, it's a measure of physical capacity only, so there's no skill involved. So that means that I won't test agility, I will test change of direction, because I'm responsible for that. And it's actually, that's much easier. If you want to try and test agility, we know that they're going to respond to the kinematic clues that the body gives away. But not just that, it's what the body does with respect to the rest of the field and what's going on around the field, where they are on the field, in fact, what half of the pitch they're at, where the ball is, where the other players are. So it's very difficult. And then how could you test that? Because you'd have to recreate exactly the same scenario later on to know that they were getting better. And I think it's very difficult to do that. So I'm very much so, let's look at the physical capacity side. So then we're on to the change of direction. And then what we have to do then is be certain of what we're measuring. I want to measure change of direction speed. And what I don't want is someone to be able to cheat the score by having a physical capacity that they're really good at that somehow snuck into it. Yeah. So, if I make my change of direction speed, there's too much linear movement in it, then the fastest athletes are just always going to keep coming out the best, right? Imagine a 30-meter sprint and you change direction and do 5 meters. Well, whoever covers 30 meters the fastest is going to win, irrespective of the 5-meter change of direction. So it's too much of a speed test. So I need to get rid of that. And then equally, if it's too long with too many change of directions, it becomes a conditioning test. Yep. The fittest people are going to win it, and they could change direction horribly. They could be terrible at it, but they got, they're fitter. So I need a test that zeroes in on that change of direction element, the change in velocity and the change in that intended direction of travel. So already I know that it can't be too long and there can't be too many turns. Equally, I might want to zero in on a particular type of turn. So for example, do I want this to be a test of a 90-degree turn, a 60-degree cut, or a 180-degree turn? you know, so that I could pinpoint what it is. And my own personal opinion on it, based on, you know, my understanding and my experience, would be that just do the 180, because it's the hardest turn. If you do the 180, then you're pretty much so there. You know, it's got deceleration involved in it. You know, it's got acceleration in it, and it's got probably the most complicated mechanics as well, right? So you might as well test that. I've got to make the distance short, so it's not speed. And everyone says, well, actually there should be a big approach speed going into it, you know. And there's two issues with that. Number one, like I said, well, now the fastest people just win. It's a speed test. But secondly, is actually, if you look at, there was some data that come out of the Bundesliga research. I forget the paper, but anyway, over 90% of changes in direction are from less than 5.5 meters per second. And that 5.5, that's like this magic numbers. That's the magic line in the sand, isn't it, for zone 5 in, certainly in stat sports, in that GPS software. So actually, not many turns. You can still look at it. It's not to say it's not important. There's some of those worst case scenario type things, but actually over 90%, I think it's about 93%, happen from less than 5.5. So then we're into, all right, what should we do moving forward now? And this is where, like I said, I try to think of my coaching side and why I try to stay in it, because I might say to you, right, Andrea, you know, as an academic, we need to look at 90, we need to look at 180, we need to look at 120. I want to see left leg, right leg. And then I want 30 meter sprint, 10 meter acceleration. Then we're in the gym. Then, you know, there's how much can you actually test? I mean, realistically, and then if you take all of this data, are you genuinely going to use it? Bearing in mind, you're going to do a jump and collect 200 metrics just from a single jump. And then there's multiple trials. And so it ends up being 3 weeks just to test. And in that time, they're probably de-trained and what have you. So there's this logistical side that goes with it as well. So I'm going to choose one. I'm going to do one change of direction. I'm going to do the 180. I think it's the hardest. Should I look at left and right legs? Because probably at the moment, the most popular one is the 505 or the modified 505, right? Where you sort of run into it from, you've got a 10 meter and then you join the gates and you've got the last 5 meters that's being recorded. And we see you've got 15 meters sprint into it. So maybe those with the best acceleration mechanics will do it. And you've got to do left and right leg. So now if you're doing 3 trials on each, now there's 6 trials. Yeah. I mean, we can get into a little bit, but then there's the, you know, is it even worth it? And personally, the answer is no. How far? I feel like we're quite involved in that at the moment. It's become quite a staple part of our testing battery that is quite hard to move from that. So for me, I started to talk about the idea that let's just do let's do 2 180 turns. We get a left leg and a right leg, because I don't think we can do anything with asymmetry. We've done loads in asymmetry over the past, and obviously I've worked with my colleague, he was my PhD student, Chris Bishop. We've done unbelievable amounts on asymmetry, so I feel very confident in being able to say that there's not much we can do with it. So let's not bother with it and let's save our time. And so if we just do 5 in, 5 out, 5 back, that's 15 meters. There's 2 changes in direction. I get your left leg, I get your right leg, and I can take everything I want from that. And at the beginning, you was like, well, you know, is it quantitative, qualitative assessment? So there's a quantitative side, which is to get the time. But, you know, that's focusing on the output, right? And there's so much, you know, all about the strategy. Well, that's to me is the next level of coach now. It's like, I think where, you know, I was on a panel before and they were saying, you know, where do you think we're going now with S&C? What's the next bit we need to try to conquer? You know, we've conquered the gym and weightlifting. We're getting really good with Excel and Power BI, and people are moving into other bits of software as well. So we're getting those numbers. But the bit I think that we need to work on is the on-field conditioning stuff, movement mechanics. And that's why maybe we steer clear, as well as the time constraints. But we should be videoing and looking at how they change direction, the movement mechanics that they make, the foot placement. That's where the richness in the information is that detail that's going to help us understand the performance, because again, that's the process, the strategy used to reach that outcome. And you know, there might be other implications that come from that. in and around how they load different limbs and maybe some things in around injury, although that's not my area whatsoever, so I'll quickly skip past there. But so for me, take the time, of course, take the time, but look at the mechanics that they hit as they complete that test. And then we can start to train those mechanics. You know, are the drills that we're doing affecting the shapes that they hit when they make that turn? And that would be, so for me, it would be that, so 5-2-180. So you do 2 turns over 5 meters and each with a 180-degree turn and film the thing, basically.
Yeah. So my question would be in this regards is that we're understanding that the quantitative analysis of the change of direction, yes, can give you some sort of metrics. And as you said, like nowadays we can drown in metrics. So trying to understand like which metric could be useful is like crucial, I guess. But in my small experience, I would say, yes, probably qualitative analysis would be way better than having kind of numbers. Not saying that numbers are useless, but what I'm saying is that do I really need those numbers in the sense of like, because if I just see the numbers and I don't see the athlete doing it, you know.
Exactly.
So what's the point of it? So my question will be now for you, how much, knowing that we have like some sort of shapes that the athlete should you know, stride forwards. So like how much those shapes are like rigid. So my question will be, if you have an athlete that change direction in a fast manner, so it's fast doing the change of direction, but maybe has like a little bit off shapes, would you rather like improve those shapes, knowing that probably in the first months will be, you know, will be new for him, so will be, you know, the score will drops, but then you will say, okay, I improved those shapes, so I could argue that maybe this athlete will be less prone to injuries, maybe. So what's your opinion on it? So can we modify, and how, to what degree, to how much can we modify the mechanics of change direction?
Yeah, yeah, question. I think, and firstly, just coming back to one of the points as to why we should video it is, again, if we have a test where we've got a 15-meter run up to it and we say, well, actually, maybe the fastest people are just winning this, and we just take the output measure, but what that person might be horrendous at changing direction, and we've missed that. But now this person's the best at changing direction. No, they're the fastest person. So it comes back to making sure we measure what we need to, and that qualitative part is one way to guarantee we start to look at the right things, for sure. So then in terms of, well, how should we change and how rigid do we need to be, and can we expect, you know, what happens if they get worse? Well, you know, we could take it to a simpler example. What if someone was, you know, doing a squat and it looked horrible? I mean, it was a disgraceful squat, but they were lifting a lot of load. You know, would you stop that person and try to give them some form, knowing that the load would have to come down while you taught them? You know, I reckon everyone would go, yeah, we'd do that. We would do that, because, you know, from the longevity point of view, eventually they're going to be able to lift more. They're going to load more joints more favorably to lift more, and they're probably less likely to get injured as well. Well, it's exactly the same if it comes to change of direction, right? But we don't always see it in that way. So if I saw someone was changing horribly, and think, actually, I could improve this in the long term. You know, don't get me wrong. If this is a player going into a big game next week, or, you know, you forget that. If we're talking about long-term athlete development, and that's irrespective of someone's age, you know, more point in the season, if we're trying to see longevity, yeah, why not? Because I know that if you put your foot here and your center of mass, you know, falls outside of the base of support, you're in a much better position. That's probably one less step you're going to have to take when you change direction. And that's maybe a few milliseconds you save yourself every single time. And that might be what you need to evade someone or to catch someone indeed. So I think it would be worth it. But I also think that when we change direction, it doesn't have to be an exact model, right? It's not about an exact model. I think everything is about within the goalposts. All right. And the goalpost can be quite wide. And that's the same for squatting, for doing clean, sprinting. Everything is in goalposts. There's no exact model. And the exact model doesn't exist because we're all different, and we're different sizes, shapes, and we have different physical qualities that we have to play to as well. But there's goalposts. You shoot within those goalposts and you score. So we're not saying you have to be parallel. You have to be roughly parallel, give or take, you know. But there are some key variables, like your center of mass has to be outside the base of support.
Yeah.
You know, that's a non-negotiable. You can still turn with it, but you're gonna have to reposition yourself, because you're not going to fall and accelerate unless your center of mass falls outside the base of support. So part of the criteria to look at is, well, what if you go into the turn with your center of mass already outside your base of support? But that's surely quicker. And that does make sense. So, all right, so how do we, you know, how might we change that? So it's thinking about, well, actually, if we go into the turn with a more narrow stance, you know, what the common mistake people make is they reach for the line. And as you reach for the line, one leg goes really far out. You almost create this V shape between your legs. Your center of mass is right in the middle of it. But actually, if you don't reach for it and the other leg, you know, you kind of got this nice parallel line, and you're much more narrow stance. It's your base support falls outside. So it becomes like false economy. Reach for the line. Actually, I know you've got to the line sooner, but it's going to take you a lot longer to get away from that line. So I think that there is roughly a model. There's some biomechanical principles that will govern whether you change well or not, but they're not rigid, and they have to be adapted to the person. But I mean, I'm sure you've seen as well, people change direction in lots of different ways. If we got someone, you know, a group of people to all change direction, you'd see a different one in every single person. Some would be really effective and you just leave them alone, and some wouldn't be, and they might load the outside leg, which makes it harder to change that momentum. That's what you're trying to do going into it. And then they might buckle over onto one side, and you might come in. Again, there's the injury implication of that, which I'll steer clear of. But from a performance point of view, then you're not able to produce force as effectively, or re-accelerate in the other direction or intended direction as well. So I think there's some guidelines that we should look to adhere to, but they are approximate for sure.
Got it. Would you agree that, like, and determine the width, like the distance between the posts is the experience of the coach itself? So, like, to determine, like, within the population, the athlete working with. So I guess this is also, like, you know, due to the experience of the coach, then determine, you know, roughly how much the shape could, I don't want to say change, but deviate from, like, the optimal.
I think so, but also think you can, agility or change of direction is one of the things you can overcoach. And I think that if we just give them a few cues, I think they can figure most of it out for themselves. Now, obviously in the test is a closed skill, right? So it's always going to be the same, you should change. But obviously when they go out onto the field, every situation is going to be totally different. So it's okay if they, you know, it changes from trial to trial between different drills and what, because then you're preparing them for the reality of every change being different. But I think if we just focus, like the cue that I like and I use is head never goes between toes. So as you make the change, I've got to try and get the right angle with the camera. We're going to here. If you got your head here and your feet here, you should never have your head between your feet at the turn. And most people can figure that out. And then you say, well, you know, how can you help yourself during the turn? And actually, and then you mimic the movement. You go, well, look with my feet really wide. Where does my head end up? Ends up inside my base of support. Therefore, I'm quite sturdy and I'm in quite a stable position, which is the opposite of what we want. We want to fall. So what can I do? And they go, oh, like, let me move my feet together. Absolutely. So let's give that a go now. Right, head never goes between toes. Think about how we can make that easier with our feet. And so they give that a go. And there are other prompts, like when you make the turn, put your inside hand down, because then you have to lean to put your inside hand down. And someone will put their outside hand down and that will shift them back over. So there's little prompts, but I don't think we need to be particularly precise or detailed beyond those points, to be honest, I think that they start to reorganize themselves, how they complete the task. So I think that in lots of coaching, I think one of the things we're trying to develop is to provide as little detail as we can and let them figure it out for themselves. When we're overly precise, I think you can take someone that could probably turn quite well and make them far worse than just giving them some tasks to do and them to all reorganize. Plus, like I said, everyone's built different, so it won't work in the same way. Or some people have an incredible amount of acceleration into it and have to adjust accordingly, or so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I will just ask just a brief question in this regards, because I feel like in regards of change direction and agility too, there's like this I'm just saying from like a practitioner standpoint, so I'm not like a research, but what I see most of the time is like there is like a over queuing from the coaches in order to to create those kind of like fixed shapes or whatever. So I also believe that it could be like counterproductive for some athlete, but maybe good for some others. So yeah, I totally agree with you. What's your standpoint? Like, what's your opinion on this idea of like queuing, and how much would you, queue if you have to, or not queue if you don't have to?
Yeah, I think you queue only as much as you need to, and you might use different cues with different athletes. Absolutely, I think that's it. But what I like is not being too definite. So the problem with saying your feet have to be X apart, or you have to lean at this angle, obviously it's very difficult for them to visualize what that's like. But equally, everyone is built so different that means different things to them, and it might put them in a disadvantageous position. So you just ask them to turn with certain principles. Again, just don't let your head go between your toes. That's fine. That works totally fine as well. But when you see someone that turns well, maybe you don't need to say anything. It's just you just.
Yeah.
But I think I would see coaches, and that is rush the process. Like if I teach you 180, I expect you to at the end of this 10-minute session, I expect you to do a 180. Absolutely not. Some people will, but some people, this is a 2-month journey, a 3-month journey. We have a block where we focus on it, and all I would do as we're preparing for you is just try to hit you different checkpoints. You're right. Can you just make the turn without putting your head between your toes? And that's it. And that's all we worry about. And little put your hand down and so on. So we have to see it as a journey that takes as long as it needs to, and not to be overly concerned. And that's probably why we do it. I think maybe we get in there and we keep going because we expect them to be able to turn or to be as perfect as the person that we can see. Oh, this person's done it. And I've got, so if this person does it, why can't you do it? But everyone, in a different scenario, it might flip. This other person might be brilliant. This one might be terrible. So I feel like we're sometimes rushed into reaching an outcome, which is unnecessary. And I agree. I feel like we say too much at times, but and as someone said to me, it's not about the idea that there's this perfect model. There's an optimal model, and that's based on how the person's built. And so people need to work through that at their own pace as well.
Absolutely. I would also say that the checklist that you come up with it's great because it helps a lot of practitioners to navigate throughout it. So it's really helpful. I'll go with my last question, and my last question will be regarding deceleration ability versus acceleration phases. I would say probably a little bit better. So how much will you think that the braking force, the braking capacity of the athlete will dictate the results of change of direction? Because most of the athlete probably will, they will be eager to accelerate as fast as possible. And then when it comes to decelerate, we'll see what happens. And
Yeah.
sometimes I don't want to say you cross your fingers, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do. Actually, I don't think it's about their deceleration capacity. I think it's about their momentum, right? It's
Okay.
their entry velocity
Yeah.
and their body mass. That's going to determine the performance, assuming they can reposition themselves appropriately. Because, I think that obviously it's important to teach the braking capacity, and the deceleration, I think, is fundamental. But if I take a group of athletes and I say, which ones are the best at this change of direction, whatever that change of direction is, it's probably going to be, you see this crazy inverse relationship, right? Is that the slowest people into the turn have the best deceleration capacity.
Yeah.
It makes total sense, right? It makes incredible sense because they're going slower. So the fastest people have the worst. And that makes total sense as well, because you've got more momentum for which you have to apply more impulse to slow yourself down. And so, with every step you take to brake, there's only so much force or impulse you can take. So force over time that each step can tolerate. So you have these sort of like shuffle steps, blah, 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 where you're trying to get rid of it, blah, 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 blah. And the faster you are, and given there's only so much capacity your leg has, the more you have to take to gradually reduce it to a point where you can hit zero. So what dictates your change of direction is probably your entry, is your momentum. If two people enter at the same speed, who's the heaviest? Because they're the ones that now got more impulse more momentum to contend with, or more impulse that they have to produce. So it's more involved than that. So, and actually, if you think about, right, so let's train the deceleration capacity, which you absolutely should, and is fundamental. Which is, well, all right, so let's do some eccentric type training, some braking based type training, some isometric type training, whatever you and so on. Very logical, and again, I agree entirely with all of it. But you got to see that whatever you training you do to improve your deceleration capacity is also going to improve your acceleration capacity, right? It's not like I'm doing eccentric training, therefore it won't feed into concentric strength. It's the same stuff, right? And the same for isometric, because think about the run into it. Well, the run into it is a series of plyometric movements where you've got some muscle stiffness, isometric muscle actions, you've got eccentric muscle actions to recoil and turn that into energy to help you run faster, which is the same stuff you use to improve your deceleration. Now you're running faster and you've got to decelerate from a greater entry velocity, and so now it probably cancels themselves out. So still incredibly important, but I think it would be difficult to say, all right, you're going super fast, but you're going to focus on your braking now, we're going to see an improvement in deceleration capacity. We're probably not. Relative to your acceleration, they're probably just as good. And I think it's almost like it needs to be a ratio. If you want to look at someone's deceleration, you need to understand their momentum going into their entry velocity, and it needs to be relative to that. Otherwise, you're going to constantly reach the conclusion that the fastest people are the worst. But it's incredibly logical, isn't it? So something like, where you do a 180 obviously has a deceleration component to it, where you've got to reach zero and then you've got to reaccelerate. So something like that has that capacity already. And so again, with my practitioner hat, my coach's hat on, this is one less test I've got to do. But again, sometimes the issue can be with the types of tests in as much as, what you do with information. If you take another example, would be like a repeat sprint ability. And not a lot of people do that now. You say, well, I didn't drop off. My speed stayed pretty consistent across the 6 trials, whatever you do. Yeah, but you didn't run very fast, did you? Whereas this person plummeted, but it's way faster than you. So it's, okay, so what do I do with that information now? You saying I'm fit or I'm not fit? I'm like, I don't know. I think you're fit, but you're slow, but this person's fast, but not fit. But then I'd rather be that person. But so you see, so I don't know what the answer is to that, because to get good at one, you have to be bad at the other. And so they become harder to understand what to do with those numbers that we're now just generating. And I think that not everyone stops to understand the mechanics of it. And that's why, in my opinion, a good coach understands the underpinning mechanics and, you know, understands the research that's gone into that. Otherwise, you take everything at face value, and, you know, you don't question anything. And that's where I think that some holes start to appear. But, you know, I think training, breaking, and I think is absolutely fundamental. But I expect it to carry over into the acceleration and top speed stuff as well.
Awesome. So I would also say, like, you know, the traditional eccentric concentric as a metric is always already done in the gym, in the weight room most of the time. So everything has to be contextualized for what we actually want to prove. So it must be like in the actual practice of the change of direction. I have another question, but probably we'll leave for another podcast. So my last take on this part of change of direction would be the amount of, like, how do I say it? The amount of, like, body positioning that is required to also determine, like, the athlete shape. So let's say I have a taller athlete and then I have a shorter athlete. So I assume the taller athlete will be like a little bit more elastic athlete, rather than the shorter athlete will be like a more muscular athlete. Let's do this big, huge division. I know that is kind of like a little bit odd, but let's go with it. So how much would you like, knowing that they have to change direction, would you implement like different kind of cues in regards of like their body, or would you just try to understand if they can do the same? So my question would be like, would you change your training in regards of like more muscular athlete or like a more elastic athlete?
No, again, the principles are the principles, right? Center of mass, outside base of support. How the person does that is up to them. Don't let your head go between the toes. You figure it out. All right.
Yeah.
It's a task for them to figure out. And that's the beauty of it, is everyone will reorganize themselves and start to recreate these sort of motor programs. Like, oh, actually, this is my line of code for how I do something. Actually, it did work better when I do this, and they start to rewrite that line of code that they call upon when they do the particular task. So, and it could be anything, because, all right, this person might be taller, but might be heavier, or a smaller person might be heavier than the taller person. I mean, it's infinite, the different ways. And, you know, if we just try to categorize people as heavy or light or tall or small, but then they have so many other dimensions that they bring in. What about their leg length relative to their torso? You know, and vice versa. And what about if you would have seen people that are incredibly strong but not that powerful? And then there's always a bit of which, you know, go back to the research, it doesn't make sense, but it does, because I see it all the time. But you wouldn't know which one was stronger and which one was more powerful, or which one could jump high yet as a bad squat. And so there's to only go off of the appearance of someone would miss so much. So goes back to what we were saying earlier. If you figure it out, these are the principles. I'll reiterate what those principles are, and when I start to look at it, I might go, oh, do you know what, why don't we try this? How was that? And if it works, let's do it. But also, I wouldn't expect it to change immediately. I might go, right, let's stick with this, and it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, and it might be slower progress for this athlete, but they're probably killing it somewhere else. So everything
everything turns place.
You know, we're trying to make a well-rounded, holistic athlete, right? It's athleticism. And so it's, you know, we're trying to work on multiple different things. And look, when we find something that someone can't do particularly well, we should be excited. We should be rubbing our hands together, because that means there's a big window of opportunity. I'm looking for stuff you can't do. The stuff you can do is, right,
exactly.
Right, well, you know, my work, there's nothing I can do here. But if you can't do that, then we're going places. So that'd probably be my take on it, really. Which is, again, when I think about myself as a coach, that's the reality of it. Me as an academic, I now want to drill down. I want to do like these different tests on them and see what it is. But in reality, it never works like that. You know, there's way too many moving parts for this.
Yeah.
So the reductionist in me, the academic and reductionist researcher in me, that's something I don't think I could ever reduce down to, let's do it that way. It just won't happen.
Yeah, I bet it would be like a true struggle, to balance those two elements of yourself.
I'm in constant, there's a constant war going on, Andrea. I'm telling you, it can be tough. Sometimes coaching and I go, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. But I say it as well. That's not just them, that's me.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's do this. I'm like, wait a minute, can you do that? You don't even know what this is or where that's come from, and so on. For like GPS metrics is a good one. There's some that are like black box numbers, and like, let's program off this. Like, but what is it? I don't know. So the academic in me is like, no way. Like, stop. The coach in me, yeah, but I've seen it works. There's the intuition and the wisdom that you develop in that. So yeah, there's a bit of a battle, but I think that battle keeps me. I check my position. I check, and I'm more reflective and critical of it. Whereas without that internal battle, people are like, okay, let's do this, and then they'll follow something, and it might lead them absolutely nowhere. In a worst case scenario, they just don't get better. Sorry, that's the best case scenario is following something that's rubbish that leads you nowhere. That's the best case. The worst case scenario is it leads you into drops and really training load. Exactly. So it's better to check yourself, really, than not.
Awesome, Anthony. We're done. It's been a lovely conversation. I really appreciate everything we discussed about, and also like your honesty and the way you brought up things. So as I said, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor to have you here with me, and it is an honor for all the listeners of ITASCS podcast. Before you leave, I would just do a brief announcement that you will be with us doing a webinar regarding tactical topic that we didn't discuss today, but I will tell everybody like to join this webinar. And so if you could give us a couple of infos on this webinar, just a couple to put just the interest in people, and then I'll say goodbye.
Okay, and no problem. Yeah, it's I'm excited to talk about training some of the soldiers, basically. And obviously it's a totally different environment, what they've got to do, and they're not athletes. They go for athleticism. They at least the ones I know, they don't see themselves as athletes. They see themselves as soldiers. All right, and that means that there's a lot more on the line. That means there's a lot more to contend with as well, and the demands are totally totally different. But then it brings in new challenges like the types of periodization and so on that you might use. But equally, they're still governed by the same principles around fitness, about getting strong, getting powerful, conditioning, the capacity to move well, and so on. So it's a discussion in and around a totally different population.
Awesome. So as I said again, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here with me. So I'll definitely look forward to hear on the webinar that we're going to do next month. So for everybody listening to this podcast, like keep in touch, and we'll upload everything regarding the webinar. So as I said, thank you, Anthony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yeah, likewise.
Awesome. I will say the last line. So ITASCS, Società Italiana di Strength and Conditioning, be part of it.
Il podcast dello strength and conditioning italiano.